Hello, it's Professor Malone, and once again, we're covering Photo Basics Part 1, Understanding the Camera, Film, and Exposure. In this video, we're going to concentrate on shutter speed. So, in the previous videos, we've covered film and ISO, aperture, and just talked about overall quality of light. And so this video, like I said, we're going to discuss shutter speed and how best to choose it. So, right now, holding your cameras, you should either, pull out your manuals or whatever, but you should be playing around with the shutter dial, changing that number. So just a little understanding of the shutter speed. The slower the shutter speed, the more light that passes through to expose the film. Okay, basically the shutter is part of the camera's body, and shutter speeds are actually fractions of seconds or can be entire seconds. Shutter speeds control both light and motion. Okay, so if your images are, for some reason, are coming out blurry, that's a long shutter speed, and for whatever reason, the camera's choosing that shutter speed and there's movement of the camera. So, just a word to the wise, if you want frozen motion, you don't want any movement at all, you need to be shooting at 1/250th of a second or faster. Okay? I like to shoot a lot of my stuff at 1/125th of a second, 1/125th of a second, just because I like to get as much light as possible, but I will shoot a lot of exposures because sometimes some of them will come out with a little bit of blur, and I like, for the most part, to have crisp images. So if you know for a fact you don't want to mess around with any blur at all, 1/250th of a second and faster. Of course, when your shutter's opening that quick and closing that quick, you've got to compensate by either being in a really bright area or having a high ISO or having a super large aperture, which is a smaller number. But you've got to compensate somehow, otherwise all of your exposures are going to be dark. Now, if you're using a tripod, or you can keep your camera really still, then you can play around with really slow shutter speeds. And then what happens is, whatever you're pointing your camera at, whatever is staying still that's in your frame or the image you're trying to take, is going to come in great detail in the image, but if there's any movement in the image, then that's going to come out blurry. And I have to say, shutter speed is one of my favorite ways to be creative with photography. So let's look at some examples on Google Images of fast and slow shutter speed. So here, this particular image is an example of a slow shutter speed. And so definitely light photography is a lot of fun. So play around with this. If you've got, the little fireworks sparklers, if you've got a bright flashlight, if you have glow sticks, whatever is just going to have a bright light, set your camera up on a tripod and, get in front of it and do some funky things with whatever your lights are. Okay, this is not the same thing. This is actually just pointing your camera at a street or, roadway, highway, whatever, and then letting the cars trail by. But once again, these are slower shutter speeds. I would recommend shooting anywhere from like 4 seconds, which may be excessive. Sometimes the longer the shutter speed, you don't even pick up light. So anywhere from 4 seconds to like 1/15th of a second, I would recommend shooting anywhere within that range to try and catch star trails or lights. Alright, but lots of fun things can happen with that. With this particular image, if you wanted to capture something like this, let's say you're on a train platform, you've obviously got to time it correctly and wait for a train to pass, but if you have people standing there, if you're shooting at 1/30th of a second or 1/60th of a second, that's a slow enough shutter speed where things moving will blur, but it's a fast enough shutter speed that if you really concentrate on keeping the camera still, then any objects that stand still probably won't be blurred. It's always best to use a tripod if you have it, but if you're not going slower than like 1/15th, 1/13th of a second, you should be able to handhold that. But like I said, you've got to really concentrate on being still. Here we have another example of the trailing cars, which is always awesome. So if you know where there's like an overpass or something, go up there. Once again, if you don't have a tripod, use a railing. Get creative. I use fences, light posts, all sorts of things. The ground, if it's not too disgusting. But rest your camera somewhere where you can almost guarantee it's going to be still and shoot away. Here's another fun thing to do if you're a passenger in a car, obviously not the driver. Put the camera on a headrest. Hold it, you gotta hold it there. Or put it on the dashboard, or hang it, not hang it out the window, but put it on the side of the car. As the car is moving, all of the lights outside of the car are going to come out trailing, whereas everything on the inside of the car, because you're keeping it, still with the car, is going to come out in focus. And so it's a lot of fun to do photos like this. So this is once again an example of a slower shutter speed. Um, so anywhere I would say from like 1/15th of a second to like 2 or 3 seconds. Also, when you're outside and you're near water, slowing your shutter speed can make the difference between getting feathery water like this or high speed photography, or a fast shutter speed is going to get you water looking like this, where you get almost every little droplet in focus. Um, Here's another really fun thing to do with slow shutter speed photography. Go out at night. Of course, you've got to be somewhere where there are actually stars, so you got to get away from the cities and open up your shutter. And here you can kind of let your shutter stay open for really long periods of time. And just, you'll capture the stars moving in the sky. Or really, actually, it's not the stars moving, it's the earth moving. Well, stars are moving and earth is moving. So whatever, you capture movement in the sky. Completely awesome and awe-inspiring. Um, just a side note, most cameras only go to 30-second exposures. And so if you want to do an exposure longer than that, you're going to probably need to invest in a shutter sync cord. Where you plug that into your camera, and then if you put your camera on the bulb setting, then you can kind of keep your shutter locked open for however long you'd like. When I used to do that type of photography where I needed my shutter open for a long time, you almost need to have like a little stopwatch or something near you so that you can keep accurate times of your exposures. Just a side note, if you keep your shutter open way too long, what can happen is you can start to get digital noise, even if you're using a low ISO, because of the heat of your sensor. So you don't really want to keep your shutter open too long. It's a fine line, but play around with it and just see what you get. Um, there are some amazing websites dedicated to helping you get good star trails. So here's one definitive method to shooting star trail photos. So feel free to just Google things if it's what you're interested in, or you can always ask me in class. And then high speed photography, which is also really awesome. Only thing, you've got to make sure you have adequate light for high speed photography, because it's happening so fast, your shutter's only open for a few moments, you need a lot of light. With that being said, a lot of these look as if they've been done in studio, which means they're using strobe lights, but you see this particular image here is done outside, someone popping a bubble. And this is done, using the 1/500th of a second, 1/1000th of a second. Definitely play around with your images. Google things. The bullets going through things is always really cool. I'm personally afraid of guns, so you'll never catch me doing bullet photography, for instance. But things like this actually interest me, like just the physics of drops of water, or the shapes, the amazing uh, shapes that happen when things fall into water. It's always really interesting and fun. So definitely play around with your shutter speed. Okay, so this is Photoshop here. Um, playing around with things. But like I said, I'm in Google Images, so I can't really help what comes up necessarily as my examples. But high-speed photography always works with people. Slow shutter speed photography doesn't necessarily work with people unless, you're kind of setting things up on purpose. As a matter of fact, let me see. There were some great examples I saw of slow shutter speed with people the other day. Oh, this one's great with the dog. See, this is just a great portrait of this dog, even though it's not your typical portrait of a dog. This is a great example of slow shutter speed. So the person's hands are in front of her face, and then she just moves her hands away. All right, the moving of the hand should be a quick motion, but that's amazing. This is amazing. All right, so you can do some non-typical portraiture using slow speed photography. So get out there with your cameras, play around with shutter speed, see what you get. It helps to have an idea of what you want beforehand so you can kind of plan out your image. But the best way to learn is just to get out and do it and see what you get. Sometimes happy accidents are the best.